Okay, ready when you are, Paige.
Cool. I have a lot of like background noise, so I'm sorry if y'all can hear it. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, solid. So I had the first part of chapter 6, which was on it's on the invasion of body snarking. So what is body snarking? Body snarking is bullying in the form of verbally attacking another person's body. And we see this a lot in the media. I think that it does happen a lot in like interpersonal conversations, especially amongst like older generations. I know my grandma will make a lot of comments about women's bodies, but we see it a lot in the media, especially when it's like very interesting to watch that this doesn't really happen for men as much. Like it definitely does if powerful men are like overweight and somebody wants to like criticize them. A lot of times they will go for the weight aspect, but this happens a lot, pretty much all the time with a powerful woman in the media. And it's really an injustice because it reduces women down to just their bodies. And I think it's a way of like handling the fact that we live in a patriarchal society and a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea of women being powerful on the same level as men. Wait, I just realized I didn't present it. There we go. So body snarking is a feminist issue because it is like reducing women down to their bodies and objectifying them. And this is relevant for all of us. Like even if we're not experiencing body snarking, or if it's not happening to us, or if it's not happening around us, this is still something that we need to care about and work to end, because as long as it's happening to some women in our society, it's going to be happening to like all women. Like this is just an injustice for all women. The root of body snarking, I think, comes from the patriarchal society, and we have like a really prevalent diet culture that like thrives off of us not wanting to be fat and rejecting ourselves, and then they make a profit off of that. We're largely unaccepting of people in larger bodies because it's a sign of like that we're not as disciplined, not as wealthy, like you don't have as much free time or money to pursue thinness. And the thin ideal in the United States is pretty strong. So one question that I have is where do you see body snarking like in your everyday life? If you do, if anybody like has anything they want to say on that.
Peyton, can you do your screen? Can you unshare your screen?
Yeah, is it this green button?
It's probably down at the bottom on your actual Zoom as opposed to on the PowerPoint.
Okay, sorry guys. Hold on.
No worries. We're all on the Zoom learning curve.
Wait, I think I'm kind of, stop share. There we go. All right.
Okay, now we can see everybody.
So the question was just like, where in your everyday life do you see body snarking, if you do?
And I saw quite a lot of you give examples on your reflections. So some examples of some more famous people that I didn't mention in the book. Who wants to speak up about that? So like Lizzo was an example that I saw. And then somebody brought up Britney Spears.
Yeah, I mostly see it online, or I don't know, like when bars were open, I used to see it in the bathroom, even though like it's known to be body positivity in there. I have seen like people be cruel, maybe because like something really bad happened, earlier in the night, but mostly online though.
I've noticed like with my friends on a personal level, if they get out of a relationship with somebody or like a fling, they will talk badly about the new girl's body compared to them, or just talk down about the new girl.
So that would kind of fit into that intersexual competition, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Specifically if it's like if it's an X's new one. Yeah.
I see it a lot when like people watch certain like TV shows, so like reality TV shows like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, etc. I feel like there's a lot of body snarking there.
Have any of you all seen it directed targeting men?
My friends who watch like The Bachelor, Bachelorette definitely targeted men as well, but that's at least from like personal experience.
Yeah, and those shows are kind of, in some way, aren't they kind of set up for that? I mean, whoever's picking is judging. The people that are watching are all judging. Like it's all about the judging, isn't it? Yeah, I've never watched a full episode. I've heard about it.
My friend's really into it, and so whenever she's over, she has me watch it, but it's not something that like I regularly watch. But yeah, it's definitely set up for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because I feel like people think that it's justified to like criticize people's bodies on shows like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette because like they kind of give off this like shallow and sort of like stupid personality, like, and so like people feel like that. I don't know, I think that people feel less bad for criticizing them, like their bodies, because of that.
Is it a place where a lot of people are trying to launch their acting career? Is that sort of what some people are doing?
I don't know. I don't think I've watched it enough to know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that either. I don't know, but
Okay. We don't need to go down this rabbit hole any further. Okay.
Yeah, I'll reshare my screen. Okay. So in politics, we see body snarking a lot, and not just towards women. I think the example with Hillary Clinton is really interesting. Someone said about her, it was just like a news source, not a particular person, but they said like, I don't think she has a presidential look. And I think it's funny because like I remember thinking that she always looked very like professional and presidential. And I think that it's just because she's a woman. But a lot of criticism has been made about Chris Christie's body and Donald Trump. And I think that like, even if you don't personally like these people, I still think it's an injustice to attack their bodies instead of their politics and like their like what they stand for. And then Trump has made a lot of comments about women, like probably countless comments about women's bodies. And my question with this is, what do you think the domino effect is of body snarking done in the media towards successful people? Because this seems like pretty far away, and we think like, oh, well, they put themselves in the spotlight, so they're subject to criticism. That's just the way it goes. But I think that this has a pretty large domino effect, starting with like successful people and going all the way down to like just normal people. So do you guys have any thoughts about that? Like what the like results are of us constantly criticizing people's bodies in the media?
It definitely sets the stage that it's acceptable.
Or like one bad comment starts and then it's kind of like a trail effect, like people just keep adding on to it. So I think that's really harmful, and obviously like it hurts them, just even that one comment and then seeing that go on. And then I think it gets people confused on how do I want to put this, like what, I don't know, get back to me on that. But I think, I don't know, like what celebrities should look like, and what they want to see celebrities look like, what's acceptable to them, and like just even like common people. So I think it just like it's a whirlwind. That's kind of what I want to say.
I was gonna say, and this relates to the last question too, but like I avoid like comment sections on like all forms of media like the plague, because I feel like everyone has something to say about like what particularly like women in media look like, um, and like you're never gonna like look the way that people want you to look, so everyone's always gonna have a critique about something, just something mean to say or something to like fix about you. So I just like I avoid it.
Do you think the body snarking is more of an acceptable way to hate than other forms of hate?
I think it's like it's just easier. Like I think that it would take a lot of like research and intelligence to like learn about, especially like with politicians, to learn about like what they stand for, like what they actually want to accomplish in politics. Like that requires way more effort to learn about that and then attack that instead of just attacking their bodies. And also, I think that like it's more like people will latch onto that easier. Like you like when people's bodies are being attacked in the media, it becomes like very, I don't know, like talked about more so than if it were them criticizing something more complex about the person, if that makes sense.
And Peyton, have you had, or has anybody in here had cognitive processes or social psychology? Because I know those are the fields that kind of talk about that. It's much easier and convenient to make a real short impression of a visual than it is to think more deeply, like you're talking about, to really try to understand particularly complex issues. Yeah.
Mhm. I think the media like rides off of us falling for that type of stuff, like the quick remarks about people and their bodies and like easy attacks on them.
There's a reason I think why, and I don't know if you all are familiar with this, of people that just are attacking higher education. And one way that we think about higher education, which is what you all are doing now, is one of our goals is to teach critical thinking. And teaching critical thinking is a threat to certain people because they want that sort of simple level thinking, right? And it's interesting how even that kind of divides on political lines oftentimes. Do you agree that the snarking is a feminist issue though? It sounds like it's happening on Bachelor, Bachelorette, and people are doing this to the men. But do you feel like this is a much more serious problem directed at women?
I think it definitely is because at the end of the day, like I don't think that discussing men's bodies is going to be the thing that keeps them from say getting elected or not getting elected. Like, but it will be for women if we don't put an end to it.
Yeah. Historically though, Peyton, and I don't know if this applies to Biden or not, but historically in presidential campaigns, it was always the taller man that won.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's a little bit more sort of respect for a taller male body than a shorter male body. And I found that to be kind of interesting that was a predictor. Yeah. Yeah. So not really critique necessarily, but certainly some kind of admiration going on for how people voted. Yeah.
Do you think they've looked at the first lady too? Do you know anything about that?
Ooh, no, that'd be some really interesting research though. I don't know if anybody's done that. How she represents. Interesting. And it was Jackie O that really started with President Kennedy. This is, you all were probably eggs. But she really started the sort of the glamour and the royalty and just a really sophisticated look kind of thing and fashion. And so there's been a tug for, I think, a lot of the first ladies to kind of fall into that role. Yeah.
And talking about the first ladies, I know at least recently with Biden, Dr. Jill Biden has been really criticized, some for her looks, but then specifically for her doctorate degree, which I found very interesting because like a male with a doctorate degree, no matter what doctorate degree, would never be questioned. But they're trying to tell her that she doesn't deserve it because it's not like a medical doctor. And I
That's
just,
the real doctor. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I have been pleased though. It seems like at least the media that I watch, the news that I watch, they're referring to her as Dr. Jill Biden. And I'm very appreciative of that. But it was interesting. A couple of elections ago, I'm trying to remember his name. There was a medical doctor running for president. He was a male, but they did not call him doctor regularly. And he was a medical doctor too, the real doctor. Yeah. Yeah, somebody commented, who can tell me about, somebody commented in their reflection about her hose, that she had a run in her hose or something and people were criticizing it. Has anybody heard her or Kamala Harris critiqued about their appearance?
Oh, I think it was me because somebody like made fun of her outfit because she was wearing like kind of a black skirt and like kind of like lacy tights, and they were kind of
Lacy
painting her as like a stripper or whatever. Like,
Okay.
so I thought that was really interesting and awful.
Okay. So it was more like, I understand the hose now a little bit better than I did. Yeah. Okay. And it's the same kind of dilemma, right? Kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't in a lot of situations. And I think we definitely saw Hillary treated that way by the media.
Okay, I will reshare. Okay, I thought this was really interesting. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, cool. My Wi-Fi is sketchy. When Trump commented on Bridget Macron's body, and then Reebok had a statement after that, I think it was just really cool, because I think it would be easy for a lot of people to say like, oh, he was like making a nice comment, like that she was in shape and that she looked good. But I like that they, like, Reebok came back and said like, that's still not appropriate. And like, why would you think that like you should just comment on her body of all the things, like you don't know anything about her. And this just goes back to the thought of like, this is objectifying women and reducing them down to just their appearance. When like, she's probably very accomplished and very smart, but like Trump just focused on her body. And I think this is a good reminder. I know that like my dad will comment on like a lot of women's bodies in like a positive way, but I'll still say to him like, you know, you shouldn't comment about people's bodies. And he's like, well, I was being nice. And I'm like, yeah, but still it's not appropriate. So I think that a lot of, especially men his age, think that way. Like, if I'm saying something nice, then like she should be appreciative. Like, why wouldn't she appreciate me saying something nice about her body? But it's just still not appropriate. So I thought that was cool that they had that statement. So on to fat shaming and fat stigma. Fat shaming is the act of criticizing and harassing overweight people about their weight or eating behavior. And what's interesting about this is that a lot of times people's appearance and their weight is tied in with assumptions about how they eat or how they exercise, when in reality, like, we could all eat and exercise the same way every single day, but we would all look different. So like, weight is not directly related to eating behavior, and it's not unhealthy to be overweight, as we've talked about in this class before. And I think that because of the culture that we live in, it's become just this idea that like, if you're fat or overweight, then this means that like you're unhealthy. And this, for some reason, makes people think that they can criticize and shame people who are overweight. And it's really damaging. And I think it's really interesting that the book talked about how fat shaming doesn't lead to any anyone losing weight. Like this isn't helping people to get healthier. So like what is the point? Because a lot of people would say like, well, like I'm just trying to help them. Like they, you know what I mean? Like they should know that like it's not healthy to be fat, or I'm just concerned for like the fact that they're overweight, but it's not doing anybody any good to point out somebody's weight. Like they already know what they weigh, and chances are like they're completely fine. And so I think it's a really important thing to note that like this is not helping anybody. And I think that we see a lot of discrimination against people in larger bodies. And I think that people who are in larger bodies experience discrimination probably multiple times every day. And there is like a lot of thin privilege in America and anywhere, because we value thin people more than fat people in our systematic organization of this country. So my question is, how do you see or notice bias against larger people, people in larger bodies daily? Like if you see it in your life, or if you see it happening to people around you, like where are you seeing this, and what do you think we can do to like put an end to this?
When I was in graduate school and I was working or doing my internship in an inpatient eating disorders unit, one of our outpatient women that I saw, she was a young woman. She was a student at Radford University, and she was very large and had some issues with binge eating. But she told me that there was not a day when she would walk across campus that people would say mean things to her, call her fat, and hoot and holler and be mean to her. She was like, it's a daily thing that I experience. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, can you imagine how painful that would be? And how would you figure out how to cope with something like that? How awful.
I think it's really interesting because we do a lot of like work. I think there's a lot of media coverage about bias and discrimination against different groups of people, but for some reason, like we aren't talking about how fat people are discriminated against every day. And like, for some reason, I feel like as a culture, we're just letting this go and not discussing it. Like I think we're really good in the media now discussing racism and sexism, but like, with like discrimination on people's bodies, there's no awareness about it. And I wonder like why that is, because I think that people are suffering, and like there's a lot of shame attached to that, because a lot of times your body just is the way that it is, and like there's nothing you can do, and like people are just targeted for it. And as a culture, I think we let it go because we think that like, well, they should just lose weight if they don't want to be targeted. But it like that's just not the reality.
I'm known in the department now as the faculty member who always brings this up, but whenever we're talking about inclusion and we start, and now we've got anti-racism statements up on the web and that kind of thing that we've really been trying to get more woke in our department, but I'm the one that routinely brings up, and we're not going to discriminate based on body size and appearance. Okay, somebody had something to say, sorry.
I was just gonna say, for the first question, I know that like discrimination in the medical field is a big thing too, based on weight. And I remember one time specifically, my mom was like redoing her insurance, health insurance, and she went to see, someone, and was figuring everything out. And this was when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. So they were like, trying to figure stuff out. And he like hadn't had anything done yet, but they were talking about it, and you have to put your weight on your health insurance, which I think is kind of interesting. But I remember my mom talking to me about it afterwards, and she said that she told them my dad's weight, and they were like, we're gonna put this down like a little bit lower, and so it just kind of makes you think, about why that is so important in healthcare, and specifically with like insurance and the amount that, you know, a copay would be or something. You know, you have better insurance if you're healthier, and people think that, you know, health corresponds completely with weight. And I know one thing in the book that talked about is that it's health is less so about like how much you exercise, but actually about like the fat stigma or like your weight, if that makes sense. And so it's like actually the stigma from being fat is more harmful than the actual weight gain. So I just thought that was like kind of interesting and something to think about, like how systematically, you know, we do discriminate against people that are overweight. So I just thought that was kind of interesting and something to add.
This is something that I mostly talked in my reflection about, like thin privilege in the healthcare system, because like I have a chronic disease and my friend also has the same disease, and she actually got diagnosed in college. I've been diagnosed since I was 10. And so since like it's an inflammatory bowel disease, and since it relates to the bowels, a lot of people have this myth, and some doctors do too, that like it's directly related to what we eat, and like you can get this because of what you eat. And like personally, like I was super healthy when I was diagnosed. I was literally 10 years old. I was doing so much activity, like it had nothing to do with like what I ate. And it's interesting of how much she's been discriminated against in the healthcare field, because like I've never been questioned for exercise or what I ate due to my illness, but she definitely has. And I found that very surprising, because like I definitely feel like doctors should be aware of like my exercise, because it definitely still affects my chronic disease as much as it does hers, but she's definitely been discriminated specifically against it. And so I actually referred her to my doctor, and apparently like one of the things that she commented on it was that he doesn't mention her weight ever in response to her disease. And that was one thing that she really loves about him. And so it's definitely something that I've realized from a perspective as a patient and as friends who have the exact same condition and things that they've faced that I haven't faced. So yeah, it's definitely a big issue in the healthcare field.
I'm a member on Facebook of the Health at Every Size group, and I just kind of lurk. I just kind of read and lurk. I don't post on it, but I just see so many people complaining about their healthcare providers, both their therapists at times, but a lot of times medical professionals, and it's the same kind of experience that your friend has had. You know, like you'll hear somebody go in for strep throat and the doctor wants to talk about their weight. And it's like, can I just get the penicillin? You know, yeah.
I think there are like countless examples of this in the healthcare system and like in other areas of life, like how our like airplane seats are pretty small. So like if you're pretty overweight, like you have to buy 2 seats. Like there's just certain things that like we built the world and we like organized our systems for thin people. And it's unfortunate because I think a lot of people are discriminated against because of that.
I know many of you probably aren't in classrooms in Smith Wright, but I've oftentimes thought about that. Just the desks are made for lean people. And it's made me wonder, like, you know, if you've got a larger body, what do you do in that situation? Like, you know, even in that situation, they're just not adjustable. They're just, yeah, designed for lean people.
Okay, I'll go ahead and reshare my screen. This study I thought was really interesting, where they had the women read an article either about weight stigma for overweight women or like a control article. And then there were like snacks in the room, and the women who read the article about weight stigma who were also overweight ended up eating more. So this is like a very, I feel like this represents the way that the shame around weight stigma isn't doing anything except for like hurting people. Like educating is one thing, but like talking about weight stigma, and then for people who are overweight, like it just is leading to like a more weight being gained. So it's not helping anybody when we stigmatize people's weight and like make assumptions about them because of that. Now this book, What's Wrong with Fat, I think this is like something that's really, I'm like really glad that this person wrote this book, and I haven't read it, but I think I would really like it. But I'm glad that like she discusses is fat harmful. And I think that like at a certain point, being morbidly obese is harmful, but I think that our threshold for like what we assume is harmful is way too low. Like we assume that anything that's not super thin is harmful, and like I think that we probably project that onto ourselves and then other people, when like in reality, I always think about how in this class we talked about how being like normal weight and then overweight is more protective than being underweight. I think that's like a really important thing to remember, because we assume that like anybody who's overweight is automatically unhealthy, but like it's really not that way. And so yeah, it just goes back to this point of like, are we really concerned for people's health, or are we more concerned about like keeping these boundaries that we've created for feeling good or bad about ourselves and about others? And like I think, I don't know what doctors go through in med school, but I'm wondering like what they're taught about being overweight or being obese, and like how I think that like the teaching seemingly could be revamped, because I think I've heard a lot of experiences that overweight people have had with doctors like discriminating against them. So I'm wondering like where's the teaching coming from, and like what's the evidence behind this? Because it seems like it's kind of doing more damage than good. And then this is like just talking about some of the organizations that are promoting fat acceptance. I don't know if any of you guys had ever heard of any of these before. Had any of y'all heard of like Health at Every Size or some of the other ones? I think that like I had definitely heard about Health at Every Size, but I hadn't heard about the other ones. But I think it's great that like we have organizations that are promoting fat acceptance, because like I said earlier, I think this is a really big issue that needs addressing. And this is probably like the best way that that's going to happen is by educating people and like putting in effort to like protect people, like in the healthcare system or in different ways that they might be discriminated against for their weight. So that's really cool. And then there's Health at Every Size. And then let's see. These are the basic components of the Health at Every Size movement. They talk about respect for all bodies, and critical awareness, which is challenging cultural and scientific assumptions, which I think is really, really crucial because as we've learned, I think throughout this class, like a lot of the things we're taught in our culture about weight are not accurate. Like they really are kind of like arbitrary rules that have been made up or have been put in place with like very little evidence for actually being true, and like are promoting eating disorders and disordered eating. And then compassionate self-care, which I think is a really cool way of thinking about health instead of the way that we would normally think about health, which would be like exercising a lot and like eating very like clean. But instead it's like talking about tuning into your own body and like resting when you want to rest and like exercising when you want to exercise, but it's not tied to weight, which I think is really cool. They talk about like working on your own health and whatever that looks like for you, but it's not related to your size. I think that could like benefit everybody if we were to see health that way instead of seeing health as something that's tied to how we look. Let's see. And then here's some questions. I guess we can start. Oh, do we have time? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll want to let Amanda have the stage here in a moment, but do y'all want to maybe hang on to these questions and see if we've got some time at the end? Would that work, Peyton?
Yeah, of course. I don't want to take too much time.
Okay, no, you've got you right-sized it perfectly.
Let me stop sharing my screen. Okay.
I see quite a few individuals who are recovering from eating disorders posting on the Hayes Facebook site. And in a lot of situations, there's just a lot of fear of like, if I engage in intuitive eating, if I'm doing health behaviors, but my body is still changing, and that's scary for a lot of individuals, particularly if they're gaining weight when they're doing that, if they're recovering from an eating disorder. But then I see it in the opposite direction also, where individuals are trying to find respect and love for larger bodies and really focus on their health behavior and let their bodies go where their bodies want to go. So yeah, I think it's a wonderful organization. Okay, Amanda, are you ready?
Yes, I am. All right. My internet was being weird earlier, but I'm hoping that it's good now
Okay.
because I moved. All right. Okay, this is in my way. Can you guys see that? So I had the second part of chapter 6, pages 97 through 106, and it kind of broke down into two main topics. The first being body snarking of women in popular culture. So we kind of talked about this earlier, the intersexual competition, and basically this is a form of aggression to other women in order to kind of elevate someone's own social status and attract higher status mates. And it's interesting to think about how this differs between men and women. So like men historically have used physical means of this versus women who were kind of supposed to protect their bodies for reproduction, used indirect forms such as gossip. These two studies I thought were interesting in that the first found that envy and that jealousy kind of plays into this. So we talked about with exes earlier. I thought of this and how being jealous of someone kind of incites that body snarking in us. And then this next study I thought was kind of scary, that it found that female adolescents considered to be higher in attractiveness reported an increased odds in being victims to this indirect aggression. So this kind of shows that they're considered threats to us. And I wanted to ask you guys, have you ever seen this yourself, or have you ever experienced this like form of jealousy? Not just the body snarking, but like the seeing others as threats. Because I know that I definitely saw gossip in high school, and I feel like the more, even though it was kind of associated with popularity, but I definitely think that I wasn't very popular, and my friend group, we kind of talked bad, unfortunately. We kind of talked bad about the people who are more popular. We didn't really know them, but we kind of talked about how like they were more attractive and that's why they were popular, and they were mean and stuff like that. And I would definitely think that now I saw, like maybe in some way I saw them as threats. I don't know, but maybe subconsciously I did. So yeah.
The female gossip, I didn't go into much detail in that writing in that chapter, but there's some really interesting social psych literature on it, that what gossip, gossip is a power move. And it's certainly like, I'm superior to this person, I'm going to gossip and cut them down. But what it also does to the person that you're saying it to, it says, don't cross me because I'll do this to you. So it's like a power move all over the place. And it makes sense, Amanda, like it's easy to like fall into that, because that's sometimes a way that people can grasp some power, but kind of unfortunate when you step back and you sort of see what's going on. Yeah.
And it plays a lot into social comparison, I think. All right. Does anyone else have anything to say? Okay. Let's do this again. This might be kind of weird. There we go. Can you guys see it again? I'll stop asking if you guys can see it. All right. So the next thing that I thought was important to talk about was how media plays into this. And the way that it does is that it creates this setup for people to bully people publicly and usually anonymously online. And there is this obsession that the media has with how women look. And this creates tremendous pressure on people to look a certain way online, especially big celebrities and even influencers and stuff like that, which further just maintains sexism and misogyny in our culture. So another question I wanted to ask you guys was, what are your thoughts on this like perfect life that people portray themselves to have? More so, what kind of consequences can it have, whether you think they're positive or negative?
Like, I absolutely hate it because the first one that I think is just like Kylie Jenner, like the Kardashians and stuff like that, and like their face, like it's airbrush. There's no way they look like that. Absolutely no way. But I know like younger girls are just, you know, like even like my mom, she can look at it and be like, they look so good. Their skin is so healthy. I'm like, no, mom, like no, it's not like, and it's just so easily trapped, or it's just so unachievable, you know. Or I even think of like James Charles as one, like he does makeup and he like edits his pictures and stuff like that. So like it's just not realistic and I hate it.
So speaking of the Kardashians,
Yeah, it's really.
oh sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
So speaking of the Kardashians, Khloe Kardashian posted on her Instagram this morning a picture of her unmodified body and how she was like, this is just the way that I look. And she, you know, she's very like thin and fit, but she's always apparently, I don't really know too much about them, but she posted that she has always had this thing with her body image and being in the eyes of the media, and being on the show. Everybody's like very judgmental of them and their family, and you know, thinks that everything that they've had has been handed to them. And like I said, I don't know too much about them, but she was just saying, just being in the eyes of the public and having that scrutiny all the time, as we've talked about, just being constantly body snarked, is just really damaging on her self-esteem. And she just really wanted to like show her unmodified body and how much it meant to her, and how conditioned she has felt to feel low about herself, and that while she loves, you know, to show herself being modified and being photoshopped, because that is like the ideal image of what she thinks she should be, because that's what other people think that she should look like. She wants to like, she had this whole thing about how she just feels this constant pressure to look perfect, and she wants everybody to know that she understands how that is, and that you're, you know, beautiful the way you are. So I just thought that was relevant to what we were talking about.
Yeah, I think that's really important to highlight too, is that not only does it have an effect on the people who are viewing it, but it has an effect on the people who are doing it. Like they, like I said, feel this constant pressure to portray themselves a certain way. And not only does that create unachievable standards for the audience to have, but it also creates just that pressure in them. And like kind of, I would assume that it makes them kind of feel like they're not enough for who they are. Like they have to make themselves look different and stuff. And like, that feeling of unworthiness. I don't know if that's something, but I would suspect that that might be something they feel. All right. This was another important thing, is the examples given about female celebrity being victims of body snarking, and these are some of the people that were talked about in the book. And I really loved that, like their examples were highlighted, but I also loved how it was highlighted how they fought back about like their photos being posted without their permission, or like being issued mentioned in issues of magazines without their permission. So one way that they fight back is just in their responses. And I think a couple of them used humor in doing this. And I just, I like that. I think that it's just a cool way, and it showcases kind of who they are. But some other important things, Melissa McCarthy and Rebel Wilson, they did this through clothing lines. So they launched their own clothing lines that were more inclusive in sizing. For Melissa McCarthy, I know the sizes ranged from 4 to 28, and then Rebel Wilson included plus sizes. And I think that is super important because I feel like clothing brands kind of miss the mark on inclusivity and sizing. So I really appreciate how they're coming out with more, with better clothing. Another example is Emma Watson on feminism, and she was attacked for a slightly revealing photo that kind of not really showcased her breasts, but in some way did, and people took that as meaning like they attacked her, saying, "How can you be a feminist and do that?" Which is wild to me. I don't understand how those two correlate in people's minds. But she highlighted an important thing, that feminism is about giving women choice and not about that at all. Like, we can't showcase our bodies because we're feminist. That's not what it's about at all. And I just think that we need more of this, and it's talked about in the book that we need more of this. So I wanted to ask you guys, what challenges would you like to see? I know that I would like to see more clothing brands, especially big clothing brands, come out with more inclusive sizing and stuff like that. And I wanted to get y'all's opinions about I know we talked about plus size clothing before. Why is there this need to have different sections in clothing stores where like plus sizes are in their own section? I think that that's really harmful and just unnecessary. So I wanted to get y'all's opinions about that.
Yeah, it seems like it's like a segregationist kind of thing.
Are there specific stores that target plus size women as well?
Is it Lane Bryant? That's I think that's one of the brands prior to these celebrities creating their own brands. It's 7-7, I think, is that right? Is that Melissa McCarthy's or
That was
okay.
I don't know much about the clothing scene because I shop mostly at Goodwill, but I do think I remember being at the mall, and I used to shop at Forever 21 a lot in high school, and there was just a whole section for plus sizes, and I just didn't understand why they couldn't just put that with the rest of the clothes. Like, why do you have to do that, like segregating? Yeah. Are there any other challenges that you guys would like to see, like regarding celebrities, or maybe some celebrities that you would like to see respond?
I've seen
This is a little bit oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. This is a little unrelated, but I know that like the CEO guy of Lululemon doesn't, he had a statement. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Where he was like, we're not going to make our clothes like above whatever, like a 12 or something, because he didn't want like larger people wearing his clothes. And I think that like there's a lot. I know that like Abercrombie has, like, their CEO person has said the same thing. So I think like choosing not to shop from brands that like have that statement could be like a really good way to like put an end to stuff like that. Like Lululemon is huge, so like they'll probably never go out of business, but I mean, anything counts, I guess. But yeah.
No, I think that or at least like not directly putting money into their pockets, like shopping it secondhand if you really want to shop it. I think that's important too. Right. This study was important, Fouts and Burgraff, because they documented body snarking in the media. And what they did was they analyzed 18 primetime TV situational comedies, and they coded for characters' sex, body weights, dialogue, and responses from the audience. And what they found was that male characters made more negative comments about the appearance to heavier set women, and that 80% of these comments were met by giggles or oohs from the audience. And then further, in 1999, they found that the thinner the female characters were, the more positive comments were made by male characters. And what this means, it was talked about in the text, is that this suggests that the media models the thin ideal and reinforces discriminatory behavior towards larger women, which then also suggests that the media portrays this body snarking as funny rather than as harmful as it really is. So yeah, I thought that was important to highlight. The next big topic I talked about was body snarking and sexism in politics. And this is very threatening to women's power through the body snarking itself, but also through the traditional values that people hold, that men are supposed to be career-driven breadwinners while women are supposed to stay at home and take care of the kids and stuff. And I think that this is really harmful especially in terms of politics. Something else is the efforts to defund and dismantle Planned Parenthood. The motivation behind this is largely that the topic of abortions, when that's such a little percentage of the services that they offer. And I think people forget about the other important things that they do. This can also have many negative consequences, such as unplanned pregnancies, unsafe abortions, etc. Overall, it kind of just seems like people who are trying to do this are trying to take away women's choices and this power, which then gives men more power and increases the gap in equality between men and women. Something else that body snarking plays into is the lack of representation in government. So as you can tell, women make up about half of the US population, but they only, as of 2017 in the textbook, I'm not sure where the numbers are now, but less than 20% of the total seats in US Congress. They also only make 78 cents the male dollar. And more on this underrepresentation is like the need to know why. And it's talked about in the book that this might be due to the way that we objectify women in the United States. This study kind of spoke on that. They did an experiment that involved 961 US adults from Amazon's MTurk, and they exposed the participants to news coverage of two hypothetical candidates. They varied gender and whether the coverage of the candidate's appearance was negative, positive, or neutral. And what they found was that negative coverage about a physical appearance had an adverse impact on the participants' perception of the candidate's professionalism. And so I wanted to ask you guys, what does this mean in terms of politics in general, I guess?
Women are just kind of plummeted into a situation where it's almost like you can't win type of situation.
I talk about that in my last slide. I think this study in particular just highlights that if we focus on physical appearance, regardless of men, women, like gender, if we focus on that, then we're kind of forgetting about the important qualities that should go into choosing a leader. And this, because it can impact how people vote and feel about candidates. And I just think that that's really harmful.
Yeah, I have found some of the vitriol that gets projected onto Nancy Pelosi, some of the vitriol that gets projected onto Kamala Harris, very unsavory. You know, it's just like, really? Yeah. And any political candidate's going to be criticized from one side or the other, you know, but it does seem like it takes on a different tone at times.
I think this is my last slide, and then we can go to more discussion. So this next section is about women in elections, specifically the 2008 election was discussed in this part of the book. So Carly and Winfrey documented, they did a communications analysis. So I think that I'm not sure exactly what they did, but it kind of seemed like they just took all literature, communication literature, and looked at it through the lens of sexism. And they found that both of the candidates faced sexism in the election. And that the category of sexiness was the one that had the worst gender bias, and people seemed to be more concerned with this rather than the more important qualities of their knowledge or political experience. And they also found that these two candidates experienced it in different ways. So for Hillary Rodham Clinton, she was criticized for many elements of her appearance, whether it was that she wore pantsuits or skirts or her weight or age. She was criticized for a bunch of that kind of stuff. And then Sarah Palin was objectified and sexualized, and she was even called Caribou Barbie. And like you said earlier, it kind of creates a sticky situation of they're like damned if you do, damned if you don't, and they literally can't win no matter what they do. Like for Hillary Clinton, she wore pantsuits and people criticized her for that, and then she wore a skirt and people criticized her for that too. So no matter what, we're either going to be judged for portraying men qualities, or we're going to be judged for being a woman. So my last question that I wanted to ask you guys is, do you think that gender stereotyping and body snarking could have had an impact in voting in this election, or just in the lack of representation that women see in government?
I'm not sure about specifically body snarking, but I do know that I saw a lot of women with internalized sexism, because I saw people who, when like Biden and Kamala Harris were elected, like some of their specific comments were women don't deserve a place in office. And these were like coming from other women who had daughters. And we were like, you have a daughter, like don't tell her that. So it wasn't specifically body snarking, and I'm sure it does have some relevance to body snarking, but I definitely saw some, even from women, internalized sexism. So
Yeah. On that, do you guys think that having our first woman vice president is gonna kind of like push us forward in the right direction, or do you think that it's gonna be one of the situations where people are like, we shouldn't have done it?
I think it depends on how like the media portrays her. I've like seen stuff, but I don't get into politics at all. But you see stuff just on like social media sometimes, but I definitely think like it depends, in how well like she does and handles everything. And like, just honestly, it's really not about her as much, which is sad. Like, you want to see, her like work come through, and any person, like you want to see them and their work come through and be seen. But a lot of it is just, I feel like, going to be how the media portrays her. And so like if it's positive, then I think it will like go a long way in allowing more representation of women. But if it's not, then it could be very like detrimental to that, I think. So I think it could go either way.
I've made two observations of her since becoming vice president. Well, first of all, she, and I think she does have a personality that is kind of, cheerful, but she is especially cheerful in front of the media. And I think she's fighting very hard to not come across as an angry Black woman, even though I know she's both Asian and Indian and Black. The second thing I've observed, and it was just so interesting, how they shift when they're all running for president and they're kind of like fighting one another, and then the candidates get picked, and how quickly they unite. But she's definitely being portrayed as stand by your man. you know, and she's always talking and looking up to him. She's always talking, you know, like, I'm standing by my man, but I'm not trying to take over. And I think it'll be interesting if anytime soon she accomplishes something very powerful, I think that's when the teeth are going to come out. Because so far she hasn't felt very threatening. But I think if and when she does something powerful, I think that's when there's going to be backlash.
So sad to think that like that's threatening to other people.
Several
Especially,
That's
yeah.
that's all that I had, because I kind of I tried to rush a little bit to make sure we got to the other questions, because I feel like they were important too.
Several of you wrote in your reflections on how, you know, the day after the election, how she spoke and deliberately kind of, you know, owned breaking a glass ceiling and owned being a role model, particularly for girls of color. And when I think about that kind of stuff, I just get goosebumps, you know, it's just like, wow, wow. We've made history regardless of what people believe in their political views. But kind of like that backlash that happened after the 2 terms with Obama, and we had that natural experiment. Y'all were way too young back then probably to remember a whole lot of that, but that natural experiment with Sarah Palin and Hillary Clinton, and the US nation chose not a woman. And then after Obama, I think there was a big swing of like, oh my gosh, we've been way too progressive here. You know, like, we've had a Black man as the president. We're not going to be continuing to be progressive. And interestingly, I think that's what a lot of the Trump followers who harbored more private prejudice, it was allowed to just unleash. You know, it was just allowed to all come out. And it seems like it has all come out. We've got a lot of that going on right now with the white supremacists and whatnot. But I worry that there's going to be backlash after this election. Like, you know, here we have moved forward, and how many people are out there fuming that there's a woman, particularly a woman of color, in that office.
I also would worry about her mental health, being that she's like that's big, very big, not shoes to fill, but just role to play, and all the criticism that she's probably going to face. But like, if she powers through, I think that's going to be really powerful. And it's going to be awesome.
I do think it's interesting that her husband has chosen to stop working and be the supportive role in that, but Joe Biden has chosen to continue teaching, and I think that's a nice little gender mix-up that kind of gives us some role models for other ways of doing things. Other thoughts on that?
To go off of the mental health idea, I remember in one of my classes, I think it was last semester, we briefly read an article that was written about AOC and how much she's been perceived as a threat, because she's not afraid to like put her foot in the door and put her opinions out there and do it strongly. And I think a lot of people have really perceived her as a threat and something to be like shameful for, I guess. I just thought it was really interesting that, like, because she is a woman and because she is not pulling her punches, I guess, and like not trying to be friendly when she doesn't want to be, I think a lot of people I think that's something to be shameful about, or like something that she should not do.
And there's a lot of vitriol directed at her too. Yeah. Well, and I had 2 thoughts that when they stormed the Capitol, I was like, they're going after Pelosi and AOC. You know, that was like, oh, that's who they're, you know, they were going after a lot of people, but that were the 2 that I was like, oh, you know, scary.
You saying that reminded me of another article that we, it might have been in this class actually, I don't recall, but of afterwards she spoke when she was finally able to like speak about it. And even one of her colleagues said like AOC was like fearing for her life because she knew that she upset people. And she was like genuinely terrified that she wasn't going to survive that day because people perceive her as so much of a threat.
Yeah. And it was very triggering for her also because she came out afterwards and talked about her her trauma history. And so for individuals with a trauma history, having re-experienced something like that oftentimes works kind of synergistically in re-triggering PTSD kind of stuff, or depression, or eating disorders, or whatever. Yeah, I worry about their mental health also, but I really also hope they have surrounded themselves with staff that are thinking about these things on a regular basis and are thinking about how to coach them and thinking about how to encourage them and buffer in ways. I watched a documentary on AOC and I found it really interesting that she lost her father, but I think she lost her father like around her late teens or young 20s. But she spoke about how much he encouraged her to speak her voice. And boy, she does. Yeah, she does. Other thoughts are you all hearing kind of in your social circles, family, social media, people upset with some of these powerful women or these vocal women?
I think both of my parents are pretty conservative, and I often hear them saying like about AOC or about Kamala Harris that like they're overly emotional and like always like oversharing. And I'm like, I don't know, it's kind of funny to hear them. Like I feel like that's the narrative around like women in power who try to change the narrative for women. It's like, well, they're being too emotional. Like just keep it to politics, but I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And Hillary was certainly criticized for being emotional at times, but then they would show Brett Kavanaugh, Supreme Court, how emotional he got when he was going through his confirmation hearings. But I've heard the same thing, Peyton, where I've heard people say, well, she's just an angry woman. And I the first thing I think of after that is like, because there's a lot to be angry about, right? Were we supposed to be passive? Like, oh, the world is unjust. I'll just, let me faint, just, there is a lot to be angry about. Yeah.
I also don't know if you guys remember, Greta Thunberg and some of the comments that Trump made about her. So I think she's now 17, but when she first started the huge environmental stuff, I think she was around 15 or 14. But Trump recently was like, oh, you're such an angry kid, just chill, Greta, chill, go hang out with your friends and see a movie. And when Trump started accusing the election being fraudulent because he didn't win and he started losing states, she commented back the exact same comment that he said to her of yo, you just need to chill, go watch a movie. Which was hilarious. It was the best comeback. She waited 2 years and was like, this is the time. So I thought she did a great job of pointing out she was fighting for this environmental thing, and then all of a sudden when Trump is taking it out of politics, taking it out of the officials who are saying this isn't happening and overreacting, and how he wasn't portrayed as much, especially on conservative media, of being overreacting. And so she was twisting back on him and being look, he's overreacting now. And so, yeah, I just found that very interesting of these women in power, no matter the age, trying to change this narrative.
Yeah, she's a strong young woman. I saw her interviewed at one point in time, and I can't remember if it's Ellen or somebody asked her, would you like to meet Donald Trump and sit down and speak with him? She's like, why would I want to speak with him? And it's not like he listens and, absorbs the information. Yeah. But isn't it interesting, even from a gender perspective, the way he spoke with passion was considered to be very powerful. when women speak with that level of passion, they're angry women, or they're on their period, or, you know, they're just women being emotional. And it's like, there's just like these double standards everywhere. But I think Peyton said it a minute ago, change the narrative. I mean, I think that's what some of these successful representatives are doing. Like they know what they're up against, and they're being more deliberate about not trying to adhere to these stereotyped gender roles. Again, threatening to other people. Peyton, do you want to ask your question, particularly about the word fat? Because I would like to have a little bit of discussion about that. And I heard some of you in your reflections say that you still felt like that was not a pleasant word to be using.
Yeah, my question was, does using the word fat as a descriptor for another person make you feel uncomfortable or disrespectful? And in what settings would it be appropriate to use this word?
I can tell you, I've seen on the Hayes group, some people say they prefer the word fat over obese. But then scientifically, we tend to use the word obese and not the word fat. But then the fat acceptance movement people very much embrace the term because they say it's an accurate descriptor of a body type.
I know that I've seen that like a lot of people who describe themselves as fat are trying to like, once again, change the narrative for being fat. Like it doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think that it's uncomfortable because we've been conditioned to think that like, oh, it's bad to call people fat. And like, of course, I don't think you would ever want to call somebody fat. Like it's not our right to do that. But like, I don't know. It's interesting that I think that it's trying to like be reclaimed, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that we should just kind of steer away from commenting on people's bodies in general. Like, why not just let people have the body they have? Like, you always talk about just living an active and healthy lifestyle, and let your body go where it goes. And like, why do we have to comment on how other people look all the time? Like this word fat should have never had a negative connotation, but like, yet it can be so harmful. I think that it's great that people are trying to change the narrative of it, because it kind of like diminishes the harmful things that it can do to people, and kind of like in some way fights back against body snarking and stuff. Like, oh, you called me fat? Well, yeah, I am fat. Like that's not a negative thing to say. Yeah.
And I really liked your take on it, Dr. Martz, of changing, instead of like the healthcare professional focusing on weight, focusing on heart health. And I think that's a really neat perspective, because I think that it helps identify people who do need to exercise or take care of their health no matter their weight, because you can't look at someone's weight and decide whether they're healthy or not. And so I definitely like that take on it, of changing it away from body weight, especially in the medical field.
Yeah. When I lurk on the Hayes group, one of the things that I see is some conflict about individuals who have type 2 diabetes, or they've developed type 2 diabetes. And everybody seems to be united when their doctors say you need to lose weight. But there's conflict going on when people make health behavior suggestions of exercising, changing the way they might be eating if they're eating in an unhealthy way. There's a lot of conflict that goes on with that, because a lot of people see that as being very stigmatizing also. And I'm fine with that, but that's the health psychology training. You know, I was trained that all of us are potentially capable of changing our behavior. And if changing our behavior can make us healthier and have better quality of life, why wouldn't we want to do that? But I do find it kind of interesting, as I kind of lurk, that you know, there are just a lot of people that are like, well, it's type 2 diabetes and it's genetic and there's nothing I could do, you know, nothing I can do about it, and nothing I could do about it other than take my medication or take my insulin. And it's like, when I see that, I kind of cringe. It's like, oh, we don't need to blame you for your condition, but health behavior could certainly be helpful, you know? So, yeah, sensitive lines around a lot of this stuff. Peyton, Amanda, do you have any last questions or last thoughts? No? Okay, nice tag teaming. All right, good to see everybody. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.